It was a sunny afternoon in a quiet neighborhood where children's laughter echoed from the streets, bicycles rolled along the sidewalks, and neighbors chatted lazily outside their homes. Among them was Jamal, a young black boy of about 11, small in size but full of pride and confidence. His dark eyes sparkled with energy, and his easy smile could brighten anyone's day. Jamal loved to tell stories about his family, especially about his dad, who he admired more than anyone else in the world. That day, he was playing with a group of friends near the corner store, tossing a small football back and forth, laughing every time someone missed a catch, and teasing one another in a friendly way. As Jamal took a moment to catch his breath, he noticed a police car slowly pulling into the street. Its tires crunched against the gravel, and the sunlight reflected off the badge on the car's hood. A police officer stepped out, tall and imposing in his uniform, eyes scanning the neighborhood with a mix of authority and casual curiosity. He walked toward the kids, who instinctively quieted down, unsure of why he was there. Jamal, however, stood tall, gripping the ball, his mind buzzing with curiosity and a little nervousness. The officer stopped a few feet away from Jamal and his friends, his gaze landing squarely on the boy. "Hey kid, what's going on here?" he asked, his voice sharp but not unkind. The friends exchanged quick glances, some giggling nervously, while Jamal felt a mix of excitement and defiance. He straightened his back, squared his shoulders, and replied confidently, "Nothing, sir, just playing football." The officer looked down at him, then chuckled softly. "Football, huh? You sure you're not causing trouble?" Jamal shook his head, smiling. "No, sir, we're just having fun." The officer's eyes narrowed slightly as he noticed Jamal's posture. Noticing a confidence beyond his age, he raised an eyebrow and asked, "And who's your dad?" Jamal's chest swelled with pride as he straightened even more, his voice steady and loud enough for the friends to hear. "My dad's in the elite forces," he said without hesitation, expecting a nod of respect or at least a smile. But instead, the officer laughed, a short, dismissive laugh that cut through the quiet street. "Elite forces? Come on, kid, your dad probably works at some office or guards a small building somewhere, right?" The words stung slightly, but Jamal didn't let it show. His friends looked at him, some giggling nervously at the cop's mockery, but Jamal kept his head high, refusing to let the officer see him shaken. He knew the truth. He knew his dad was real, brave, and accomplished, and he wouldn't let anyone, especially not this officer, make him feel small for it. "No, sir," Jamal replied, his voice calm but firm. "My dad really is in the elite forces, and he's trained to handle very serious situations. I'm proud of him." The officer's laughter faded slightly, replaced by a curious glance, though he tried not to show it. The air felt heavier now, the playful atmosphere of the street shifting into something tense yet exciting. Neighbors peered from their windows, sensing the unusual encounter, and Jamal's friends instinctively stepped closer to him, showing their support without saying a word. The officer crossed his arms, clearly trying to mask a growing awareness that maybe this boy wasn't exaggerating, but he couldn't let himself admit it so easily. "Sure, kid, sure," he said sarcastically, though his voice carried a hint of doubt. "So if your dad's in the elite forces, I bet he's very strong and very serious, huh?" Jamal nodded, not backing down, and added, "Yes, sir, he's trained to protect people and face danger, and he's very serious about his work. I'm lucky to have him as my dad." The officer looked at him more closely, noticing the boy's calmness, his steady gaze, and the quiet confidence that seemed much bigger than his size. It was unusual to see someone so young stand firm against a figure of authority without fear. And for a moment, the officer felt a flicker of respect, though he tried to hide it. The conversation drew the attention of a few bystanders walking down the street, some pausing to watch. Sensing that something interesting was happening, Jamal's friends whispered encouragement, telling him he was doing great, and Jamal smiled, realizing that courage wasn't just about saying the truth. It was about standing by it, no matter who doubted you. He gripped his football tightly, ready to continue playing, but also ready for whatever happened next, unaware that the real test of his pride and courage was about to arrive. The officer glanced at Jamal one more time, smirked, and shook his head as if dismissing him, but there was a subtle tension in his posture now, A slight pause before he spoke again. Something about this boy seemed different, something that made the officer wonder if maybe, just maybe, the story about his dad was true. And in that moment, the quiet street became the stage for a story that no one would forget. A story about pride, courage, and the power of standing tall, even when laughed at. The cop's laughter faded slowly, but the echo of it still hung in the warm afternoon air. Jamal stood quietly, his eyes locked on the officer, refusing to let a single trace of fear or doubt show. His friends huddled closer, sensing that this moment was bigger than a simple street conversation. There was something electric in the tension, a strange mix of curiosity, pride, and the kind of suspense that made hearts beat faster. Jamal knew that the officer didn't believe him, but he didn't care. He had grown up hearing stories of his father's bravery, stories of late-night missions, extreme training, and a level of discipline that most adults could barely imagine. The boy felt a surge of confidence thinking about those tales, and he knew that even if the world laughed at him, the truth was stronger than any doubt. He took a slow breath, tightened his grip on the football, and spoke calmly. "Sir, my dad really is in the elite forces, and he trains every day to protect people. I know it sounds impossible, but it's true." The officer raised an eyebrow, leaning slightly closer as if expecting the boy to falter. "Protect people? At your age, kid, you wouldn't even understand what that means," he said, his voice carrying a mix of mockery and curiosity. Jamal didn't blink. He didn't shrink. He felt the energy of his father's lessons flowing through him. The pride, the discipline, and the quiet strength that didn't need to shout to be noticed. "I do understand, sir," Jamal said firmly. "I see in my dad every time he comes home exhausted but still smiling. Every time he teaches me to be brave, honest, and strong. I may be small, but I know the truth about him." Around them, the neighborhood seemed to pause. The hum of distant cars, the chatter of neighbors, and the laughter of children softened, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Some of Jamal's friends exchanged glances, wide-eyed and impressed, realizing that their little companion wasn't just speaking bravely. He was commanding respect without even trying. The cop shifted his weight slightly, crossing his arms, a faint frown appearing on his face. He had expected to hear childish exaggerations, but something about Jamal's calm confidence made him hesitate. "All right, kid," the officer said slowly, testing him. "If your dad is really in the elite forces, maybe he's serious, maybe he's strong, but I doubt he'd come running over just because of something you said, and what if he did? Would that change anything?" Jamal smiled slightly, a spark of excitement in his eyes. He had been waiting for this moment, though he didn't yet know how quickly it would come. "Sir, I don't need him to come right now to know the truth. I know who my dad is, and that's enough for me. But I think if he ever did come, everyone here would realize that respect isn't given. It's earned." The officer's smirk faltered, and he took a small step back. Realizing that this boy was different from the others he had encountered, there was no arrogance in Jamal's words, only quiet certainty, a kind of strength that didn't shout for attention, but demanded it anyway. Around them, a few neighbors had begun to watch from their porches, sensing the unusual energy of the moment. Phones were discreetly raised, recording the encounter, capturing what everyone instinctively knew was something remarkable. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed from down the street. The low rumble of a vehicle, steady and purposeful. Jamal's heart skipped a beat, and he glanced toward the approaching sound. His friends followed his gaze, curiosity turning to surprise as they noticed a figure stepping out of a large black SUV, tall, broad-shouldered, and moving with the calm precision of someone who was trained for anything. The officer squinted, his casual confidence beginning to waver, his earlier laughter now replaced by a flicker of unease. Jamal straightened, a small smile tugging at his lips. He knew that the moment his father walked into the scene, everything would change. He didn't need to explain anything. The truth would speak for itself. And yet, he stood there calm, proud, and ready, as if he'd been preparing for this exact instant his entire life. The street seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation. Everyone sensing that what came next would be unforgettable. The boy's courage, the officer's disbelief, and the father's impending arrival were about to collide in a way no one could ignore. The rumble of the approaching vehicle grew louder, sending vibrations through the street. Jamal's friends exchanged excited whispers, their eyes wide with anticipation. They had never seen anyone move with such authority, such quiet confidence, and they felt a mix of curiosity and awe. Jamal's heart raced, not with fear, but with a strange thrill, knowing that the moment his father arrived, the entire dynamic would shift. The officer, meanwhile, straightened, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. He had expected a small exaggeration from a child, not this level of certainty. Jamal could see the outline of his father now, stepping down from the SUV, his movements calm, precise, and effortless. He wore casual clothes, but there was no mistaking the presence of someone trained to lead, protect, and command respect. The officer's eyes narrowed, a nervous twitch in his jaw revealing that he was beginning to realize this wasn't a joke. Jamal's friends shuffled slightly, sensing the tension, and instinctively forming a protective circle around him. Their whispers died down as the father's calm gaze swept over the scene, assessing everything with quiet authority. The boy's father stopped a few steps away, standing tall and composed, his posture perfect, his expression unreadable. He didn't shout, he didn't rush, yet his presence alone seemed to fill the street, demanding attention. The officer's smirk faded, replaced by a subtle unease. He had laughed at the boy moments ago, certain that this was all fantasy, but now he couldn't ignore the undeniable truth, the father's reputation. His demeanor, and even the way he carried himself spoke louder than any words could. Jamal's chest swelled with pride, and he felt a surge of courage. His small hand tightened around the football as he stood firmly beside his father, not needing to say anything. The father's eyes briefly met his son's, a small nod of approval passing between them, silent but powerful, conveying a bond built on trust, love, and shared values. The officer shifted uncomfortably, realizing that he had misjudged the situation entirely. His laughter from earlier now seemed shallow, almost foolish, and the face of the truth standing before him. Neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by the unusual scene. Phones were raised, capturing the unfolding drama. Some whispered to one another, commenting on the boy's bravery and the father's impressive presence. It was no longer just a small street confrontation. It had become a moment that demanded attention, a story that would be remembered. The officer cleared his throat, trying to regain control, his voice less confident than before. "So, you really are telling the truth?" he asked. Cautiously, Jamal's father finally spoke, his voice calm, deep, and steady, carrying authority without aggression. "I am, officer," he said simply, looking directly at the man who had doubted his son. "My son has never lied about who I am or what I do. He is proud, and I am proud of him, just as I respect everyone here." There was no threat in his words, only honesty, strength, and an unshakable calm. The officer's eyes flickered between father and son, realizing that this was not a situation he could mock, dismiss, or control with sarcasm. For a moment, silence fell over the street, the kind of silence that makes time feel slower, heavier, more significant. Jamal's friends stared in awe, unable to speak, sensing that they were witnessing something rare, something extraordinary. Even some neighbors who had doubted the boy moments ago now nodded subtly, recognizing the courage it took to stand firm in the face of ridicule. The father's presence alone seemed to transform the energy of the street, replacing tension with respect, disbelief with admiration, and laughter with quiet awe. The officer finally swallowed hard, straightened his posture, and took a slow step back, trying to regain composure. "All right, I see now," he said, his voice lower, less mocking, tinged with reluctant respect. Jamal smiled slightly, proud but composed, standing beside his father, knowing that he had faced ridicule without fear. The moment was not just about proving a point. It was about integrity, courage, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing the truth and standing by it. And as the father looked down at his son with a small, approving smile, the streets seemed to hum with a new energy, one of respect, wonder, and the realization that sometimes the smallest people can carry the greatest courage. The officer, still standing, could no longer deny it, and for the first time he saw Jamal not as a child who bragged, but as someone who had truth, pride, and bravery flowing through him in every word. Every eye on the street now understood that this encounter was more than a laugh or a claim. It was a lesson, a reminder, and a story that would not be forgotten. The street was quiet now, but the air was thick with tension. Every movement seemed louder, every glance sharper, as if the world itself had paused to watch what was about to unfold. Jamal stood beside his father, feeling the steady warmth of his presence, a silent reassurance that made him feel taller, stronger, and braver. His friends looked on, wide-eyed, their mouths slightly open, realizing that what they had thought was just a small confrontation had turned into something far bigger. The officer, still standing a few steps away, tried to regain control of the situation, but his earlier confidence had been shaken. He cleared his throat, shifting from foot to foot, the mocking smirk that had been plastered across his face moments ago, now replaced by uncertainty. "So, your dad really is all of that?" he asked cautiously, his voice uneven, betraying a hint of respect he didn't want to admit. Jamal didn't respond immediately. He simply stood tall, his dark eyes unwavering. A silent declaration of truth. The father finally stepped forward slightly, his presence commanding without needing to speak loudly. "I am," he said simply, his voice calm but firm. "My son has nothing to prove to anyone here, but he does have the courage to speak the truth, something you should remember, officer." His words were direct, measured, and carried the weight of experience, training, and authority. The officer swallowed hard, his earlier laughter and mockery now feeling like a distant memory, a foolish shadow, compared to the reality in front of him. Jamal's friends shuffled closer to him, some nudging each other quietly, amazed at the calm bravery the boy was showing. Even the neighbors who had been watching from their porches were captivated, whispering about the incredible presence of the father and the quiet courage of the son. The boy's smile was small, almost imperceptible, but it was a smile that carried pride, relief, and the unspoken satisfaction of having faced ridicule without flinching. The officer took a cautious step forward, glancing briefly at the father, then at Jamal, trying to maintain a semblance of authority. I didn't think you were serious," he admitted quietly, his earlier sarcasm gone, replaced by something closer to disbelief. The father's eyes remained calm, unyielding, yet not unkind. "Many people underestimate courage when it comes from someone small or young," he said, glancing at Jamal with quiet pride. "But truth and integrity don't depend on size, age, or appearance." The boy's gaze met the officer's, steady and unwavering, and for the first time, the officer felt a twinge of humility. It was unsettling, realizing that this boy had faced his mockery and stood firm, unwavering in the truth. While he had assumed superiority based on uniform, age, and experience around them, the street seemed to hold its breath, the distant hum of cars, the chirping of birds, and even the rustling of leaves fading into the background, leaving only the intensity of this confrontation. The father took another step forward, his tone gentle but firm. "Respect isn't demanded with a uniform or a title. It is earned through honesty, courage, and action, something my son has shown in the last few minutes. And something you should remember going forward." The officer's lips pressed together, a silent acknowledgement forming in his eyes. He knew he had underestimated the boy, and he also understood that this moment was a lesson, not just for him, but for everyone watching. Jamal's chest swelled with pride, yet he remained composed, standing as if he had known this moment would come. His friends whispered among themselves, amazed at how a small boy could hold so much strength, and how the presence of a father could turn disbelief into awe. The father's gaze softened slightly as he looked at Jamal, a nod of approval passing between them. Unspoken but powerful, showing that courage and integrity were always recognized by those who mattered most. The officer finally straightened, taking a deep breath, and spoke with a tone that was quieter but no longer mocking. "All right, I see it now. I shouldn't have laughed. You've both shown me something important today." His words hung in the air, heavy with respect, and the tension that had gripped the streets slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet admiration for bystanders and friends alike. The encounter had shifted completely, the boy's courage validated, the father's presence commanding, and the officer forced to confront the lesson that sometimes humility comes in the most unexpected forms. And as the father and son stood together, the streets seemed to breathe again. The small crowd of neighbors and friends realizing that what had started as a moment of ridicule had transformed into a story of bravery, integrity, and respect. Jamal's smile widened just slightly, knowing he had stood tall, faced out, and shown the world that courage doesn't need size to be powerful. This was not the end, but the turning point. The moment that would be remembered long after the street returned to normal. The father took a calm, deliberate step forward, his presence immediately commanding attention. Jamal stood close beside him, his small hand brushing against his father's leg, feeling the steady warmth and reassurance of someone who had faced danger countless times and never faltered. The officer's smirk had completely vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease as he realized the reality of the situation. The father didn't rush or shout, yet every movement he made carried authority, experience, and quiet confidence. The street seemed to hold its breath, neighbors peering from porches and windows, some whispering in disbelief. Phones pointed, ready to record a moment they instinctively knew would be extraordinary. The father's eyes met the officer's directly, calm but piercing, as if he could see past the uniform, past the mockery, straight into the man's doubts and assumptions. "I understand you laughed at my son," he said evenly, his tone steady but firm. "But the truth cannot be denied, and courage cannot be measured by age or size. I suggest you consider that before judging anyone again." The officer opened his mouth, perhaps to argue, but the words faltered, trapped somewhere between pride and disbelief. The father's presence alone seemed to shift the energy of the street, making the earlier tension almost palpable, yet strangely electrifying. Jamal's friends exchanged wide-eyed glances, sensing the climax of the confrontation. They had never seen anyone carry such calm authority, and the contrast between the small boy and his father's imposing presence was breathtaking. Yet Jamal stood tall, not shrinking, not hiding, and not needing to prove himself further. The silent strength between father and son spoke louder than any words could, a shared understanding that bravery and truth were not negotiable. The officer's posture shifted, a small step back, his arms lowering slightly, as if the weight of what he had just witnessed pressed upon him. I didn't expect this," he admitted, voice quieter now, tinged with respect he hadn't intended to show. The father didn't smile or mock him. Instead, he nodded slowly, signaling that the boy had done everything perfectly. "It's all right," he said calmly. "But remember, every person deserves respect until they prove otherwise, and laughter at someone else's truth only reveals the weakness of the one who laughs." The neighbors murmured softly, some nodding in agreement, some whispering about the boy's bravery and the father's calm authority. The cop's earlier arrogance had dissolved completely, replaced by an awkward humility. He realized that he had underestimated not just Jamal, but the father too, and that pride without understanding could leave even a grown man embarrassed in seconds. The father glanced at his son, a small, approving smile touching his lips, and Jamal's chest swelled with pride, feeling validated and confident in a way words could never capture. For a brief moment, everything on the street seemed suspended. The distant hum of traffic, the chirping birds, and even the rustling leaves fading into the background, leaving only the intense connection of respect, courage, and integrity. Jamal's father spoke again, this time softer for the boy's friends to hear. "Courage is not loud. It is quiet and steady. It does not seek approval, and it does not need validation. But when it stands firm, even the most skeptical must recognize it." The words landed like a weight of truth, leaving an invisible mark on everyone present. The officer finally exhaled slowly, straightening as best he could, and nodded in acknowledgement. "You've both shown me something important," he admitted, his earlier mockery replaced by respect. The father's gaze softened slightly, still calm, but filled with pride for his son. Good. Now you understand the difference between laughter and judgment, between assumptions and reality, he said, signaling an unspoken lesson not only to the officer, but to everyone watching. Jamal's friends whispered excitedly among themselves, amazed at how the small boy had faced ridicule, and how his father's presence had completely changed the situation. Even the neighbors who had doubted him moments ago now nodded subtly, recognizing the power of truth and integrity. The boy looked up at his father, a small, proud smile crossing his face, feeling the weight of the lesson he had just lived. The officer, standing a few steps away, could no longer deny it, and the street seemed to hum with quiet admiration for the courage, discipline, and unshakable truth that had just been revealed. And as the father and son walked together down the street, side by side, the atmosphere changed completely. What had begun as a moment of ridicule had transformed into a story of bravery, respect, and the quiet but undeniable power of truth. Every witness would remember the encounter, not as a street confrontation, but as a lesson about courage, humility, and the extraordinary strength that can exist in even the smallest figures. The tension in the streets slowly began to ease, though the memory of what had just happened lingered in every corner. Jamal stood beside his father, still holding the football, feeling a surge of pride and relief. His father's calm authority had not only changed the officer's attitude, but it also reminded everyone watching that courage and integrity were far stronger than sarcasm or mockery. The cop, once mocking and loud, now stood quietly, shifting from foot to foot, his eyes flicking nervously between the boy and the father. Jamal's father looked at him with a small nod, a silent message of reassurance and pride. "You did well, son," he whispered, just enough for Jamal to hear, and the boy's chest swelled with a quiet confidence, knowing that he had stood firm, faced ridicule, and never once wavered. Around them, neighbors and friends began to murmur, commenting softly on the boy's bravery and the father's impressive presence. Some whispered that they had never seen such calm authority combined with such unwavering courage from someone so young. The officer cleared his throat, finally finding the courage to speak again, his voice quieter, measured, and edged with reluctant respect. I shouldn't have laughed," he admitted, glancing down at Jamal. "You've proven something important today, something I didn't expect. I see now that courage isn't about size or age." His words were tentative, but they carried a weight that made it clear he had learned his lesson. Jamal smiled slightly, not gloating, but proud that the truth had been recognized. The father stepped slightly forward, his gaze calm but firm. "Respect is not earned through fear or mockery," he said, his voice carrying just enough authority to command attention without intimidation. "It is earned through honesty, courage, and action, something my son has demonstrated today, and something you should remember going forward." The officer swallowed, his chest rising and falling as he absorbed the weight of those words, realizing how completely he had misjudged the situation. Jamal's friends moved closer, their eyes wide with admiration, whispering to one another about how brave he had been, and how his father's quiet authority had transformed the street into a scene that felt almost larger than life. Some neighbors nodded subtly, recognizing the lesson in front of them, and a few quietly applauded the courage they had witnessed. The boy's small hand brushed against his father's again, and in that simple touch was a connection that said everything words could not. Courage, pride, and trust intertwined. The officer finally nodded, straightening his posture, a hint of humility softening his features. "You've both taught me something I won't forget," he admitted, his voice calmer and free of sarcasm. "I see now that bravery can come from anyone, at any age, and that truth has power beyond words." The father's gaze softened slightly, approving. "Good. Now you understand that respect is given to those who earn it, not those who demand it, and that assumptions can often be wrong." The boy's friends whispered excitedly among themselves, realizing that they had witnessed more than just a confrontation. They had seen courage, integrity, and the quiet power of truth unfold before their eyes. Jamal smiled proudly, feeling the weight of the lesson he had just experienced. The father looked down at him once more, a small nod passing between them. an unspoken promise that the boy's courage would always be recognized, and that the bond between them was stronger than any doubt or ridicule. Neighbors slowly returned to their activities, some still glancing back with admiration. Knowing that what they had just witnessed was extraordinary, the officer stepped back, giving space, his attitude completely transformed. There was no more mockery, only a quiet understanding that courage, integrity, and the truth were forces he could not ignore. The street hummed with the subtle energy of respect and acknowledgement. And Jamal realized that this encounter had not only proven his father's truth, but it also strengthened his own confidence. As father and son began to walk down the street together, side by side, Jamal's small smile reflected the pride he felt. His father's calm authority had turned ridicule into a lesson, laughter into respect, and disbelief into awe. The officer watched silently, knowing that the boy had faced him without fear, and that he himself had learned something he would not forget. The street, now returning to its usual quiet rhythm, seemed forever changed by the courage, integrity, and quiet heroism of a small boy and the man who had raised him. The street slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the energy of what had just happened lingered in the air. Jamal stood beside his father, his chest still filled with pride, knowing he had faced ridicule and emerged stronger. His small hand brushed against his father's, a silent signal of shared strength, trust, and unspoken pride. Around them, neighbors whispered softly, some nodding, others shaking their heads in awe. And even Jamal's friends could barely contain their excitement, realizing they had witnessed something extraordinary. The officer, still standing a few steps away, had completely changed. His posture was straighter, his gaze less mocking, and there was a quiet humility in the way he now looked at the boy and his father. He had come expecting to dominate the interaction with sarcasm and authority, but instead he had been taught a lesson he would not forget. The father noticed the shift, his calm smile acknowledging that justice had been served in a way far more meaningful than force or words. Jamal's friends gathered around him, patting his back and whispering words of admiration. "You were amazing," one said, eyes wide with respect. Another added, "I didn't think anyone could stand up to that cop like you did." Jamal smiled, feeling proud but humble, understanding that courage was not about winning or proving others wrong, but about standing firm in the truth, even in silence. The boy had made a statement louder than any argument. The father placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder, squeezing it gently. "You've done well today," he said quietly, a tone of deep pride in his voice. "Remember, courage isn't just about facing others. It's about knowing who you are, standing for what is right, and never letting fear control you." Jamal nodded, feeling the weight of those words sink in, realizing that the encounter had been more than just a confrontation. It had been a life lesson, one he would carry forever. The officer finally approached them, this time with careful steps, his voice steady but respectful. "I want to apologize for laughing at you," he admitted, eyes meeting Jamal's. "I was wrong to doubt you, and I've learned something important today about respect and courage. Thank you for showing me that bravery can come in unexpected forms." Jamal's father nodded slightly, acknowledging the words without anger, and Jamal felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that truth had triumphed. Neighbors continued to watch, some smiling, some whispering to each other, realizing that what they had witnessed was not just a street dispute, but a display of character, integrity, and strength. The boy's courage had inspired not just his friends and family, but everyone who had been present, and even the officer, who had been forced to confront his own assumptions. Jamal looked at the people around him, sensing a shared feeling of admiration and respect. The father turned to his son, his tone lighter now, filled with warmth and pride. "You've earned your place in this neighborhood, not because of me, but because of yourself," he said. "Remember this feeling, the pride of standing for the truth, and let it guide you in the future." Jamal's smile widened, knowing that he had proven something to himself, his friends, and the community, without arrogance or anger, just quiet confidence. As the father and son began to walk down the street together, the officer stepped aside, nodding respectfully, a silent acknowledgement that the boy's courage had changed his perception. The neighborhood, too, seemed to recognize the moment as extraordinary, whispers turning into quiet admiration, and the hum of the street now carrying a sense of respect for bravery, truth, and integrity. Jamal's friends followed, still whispering excitedly. "I've never seen anyone like him," one said, and the others nodded, the memory of the encounter burning brightly in their minds. The father's hand rested lightly on Jamal's back, guiding him forward, but it was clear that the boy had grown in those few intense minutes. His confidence solidified, his sense of self strengthened, and his courage recognized by all who had watched. And as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the street, Jamal walked with his father, proud, calm, and inspired, knowing that courage, integrity, and truth had won, and that even in the face of doubt, mockery, or disbelief, standing firm in what you know to be right can transform not only your own life, but the lives of everyone who witnesses it. The street had returned to its usual rhythm, yet the memory of what had happened lingered like a warm, glowing light. Jamal walked beside his father, his steps steady, his small chest full of pride and quiet confidence. He had faced ridicule, doubt, and disbelief, yet he had never wavered, and the lesson of courage, truth, and integrity now burned brightly in his heart. Around them, neighbors whispered quietly, still replaying the scene in their minds, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others smiling, knowing that they had witnessed something rare and extraordinary. Jamal's friends followed closely, their eyes wide and voices hushed with admiration. "I can't believe he stood up to that cop," one said softly. "And his dad, wow, he's amazing." Another nodded, eyes sparkling. "I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that without getting angry or scared." Jamal smiled faintly, understanding that bravery wasn't about yelling, fighting, or proving anyone wrong. It was about standing tall in the truth, even when the world laughed at you. The father glanced down at Jamal, his eyes filled with quiet pride. "Remember this moment," he said softly, his voice gentle but steady. "The world will doubt you, people will laugh, and challenges will come. But if you stay true to yourself, if you face life with honesty, courage, and respect, you will always stand strong." Jamal nodded, feeling the words settle deep in his chest. A reminder that bravery and integrity were gifts he could carry throughout his life. The officer, now standing a few steps away, watched silently, his expression no longer one of superiority, but of reflection and respect. He had learned a lesson he would not forget, one that went far beyond the rules of authority or uniform. I see it now," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Courage and truth don't depend on age, size, or position, and respect has to be earned, not assumed." His words hung in the air, sincere and humbling, and the moment felt almost sacred, a rare convergence of understanding. Neighbors began returning to their routines, but the energy of the encounter remained, a quiet acknowledgement that they had witnessed something special, something that would ripple through the street, the neighborhood, and perhaps even their own understanding of courage and integrity. Jamal's friends whispered quietly, sharing the lesson they had just learned, their admiration for the boy and his father growing with every word. Jamal looked up at his father, a small smile on his face, feeling stronger, braver, and more confident than ever before. "Thanks, Dad," he said softly, "for believing in me, for teaching me, and for showing everyone the truth." The father smiled, a warm, proud smile, resting a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "You've always had the courage inside you," he said. "I only helped you show it, but today, you proved it to the world, and most importantly, to yourself." The sun began to sink lower, casting a golden glow across the street, and Jamal realized that this day would stay with him forever, a memory of bravery, integrity, and the power of standing tall even when the odds seemed against him. He had learned that courage wasn't loud. It was steady, quiet, and unwavering, and that truth and pride could transform even the most doubtful hearts. The officer, too, had been transformed. His perspective shifted by the quiet confidence of a small boy and the steady authority of a father. As Jamal and his father walked home, side by side, the boy's friends trailing behind, The neighborhood seemed to hum with the unspoken lesson. Respect, bravery, and honesty were more powerful than mockery, sarcasm, or fear, and Jamal knew, deep down, that no matter what challenges came his way, he had faced doubt, ridicule, and disbelief before, and he had emerged stronger, proud, and unshakable. By the time they reached the end of the street, the sky had deepened into a rich, golden-orange hue, and the warmth of the sun felt like a reward for the courage they had shown. Jamal looked up at his father once more, knowing that this was a moment he would never forget, and that the lesson of truth, courage, and integrity would guide him for the rest of his life. The street, the neighbors, and even the officer would all remember this day as the day when a small boy stood tall in a father's. Quiet authority reminded everyone of what real courage looked like. And as the father and son disappeared around the corner, the soft murmur of admiration following them, the neighborhood seemed brighter, warmer, and fuller of respect, a reminder that even in the smallest moments, bravery and truth can leave a lasting mark on the world.